and Brenda Lawrence of Michigan. And thank you to the Secretary, Mr. Secretary. It's an honor to welcome you to the Capitol because you are such a devoted champion for working families. And Wendy Chun-Hoon, Director of the Labor Department's Women's Bureau. We'll hear from her. Sarah Jane Glynn, Senior Advisor of the Women's Bureau. These women, these leaders in the Labor Department are so focused on this important issue. And our very VIPs today, I know everybody will understand with all the respect I have for our guests that I introduced, our VIPs today are Leah Rambo, Training Director of Smart Local 28, and Bethany Foto, an advocate for family values at work. They have the stories of America's working families. And as we know, today marks the day when women's wages catch up to men's income from last year, a gap of 83 cents on the dollar. I said to our friends earlier, before I had to take this call, that can you imagine one of these days young people will look back and say, can you believe there was a time when women did not make the same amount of as men did for the same work? Again, this disparity cost more than $400,000 over a career. Imagine what that means in money for rent, bills, food, groceries, lower credit scores, and costlier loans. And it has a big impact on women's retirement. We hear the Labor Department is releasing a report that found that the pandemic compounded these inequities, especially for mothers and women of color. Last year, the Democratic House proudly took action to help right this wrong by once again passing Chair Rosa DeLauro, whether it's child tax credit or any of these issues, in this case, the Paycheck Fairness Act, which will end pay secrecy, you know what that is, and empower women to hold employers accountable for pay discrimination. Well, let's hear from our folks right now, and next we're going to hear from the distinguished former mayor of the city of Boston, former member of the labor movement. Maybe you still are a member of the labor movement. Still a member of the labor movement. A person who really understands the needs of America's working families, has been a leader on their behalf. We're very honored to have with us the distinguished Secretary of Labor, Secretary Walsh.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's such an honor to be with you today, and Congressman Spear and Lawrence as well, and all of the distinguished speakers here today and everyone here. I was told I have a minute and a half, so I'm going to take 2.5 minutes. The Speaker just addressed this. Equal Pay Day. It is March 15th, 2020. March 15th, 2020. And in this country, we still have inequities when it comes to pay. And when you look at the numbers from white women to black women to Latino women, those numbers even get worse. And as mayor of the city of Boston, we started to address this issue by bringing people to the table, by bringing employers to the table to say, we need to address it. I know there's lots of legislation, and I was a state rep before I was the mayor, and I was in the legislature 16 years, and I think I voted probably 6 times on equal pay legislation. When it's not that complicated, then employers should recognize, pay women the same as you pay men for the same job. That's the bottom line. And we're going to talk a little bit about benefits here as well today. I want to thank some of the press for being here today, but I wish we had more press here today. Because if we're at this podium for another issue, this room will be packed with cameras and reporters. Because in the media, in some cases, women reporters get paid less than men reporters. So we need to make sure that this issue was once and for all addressed. Women's History Month is an opportunity to learn about and celebrate women who have made impacts on this nation, something that's really important for us to do. Many of the key leaders and women in this room are the people we should be celebrating. I just want to take a moment to thank all the women in this room for all the work you do, particularly in public service, in the private sector as well, to help American people. I have to do this because it's really important. The Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor published a report. It's called Bearing the Cost of How Overrepresentation in Undervalued Roles Hurt Women During the Pandemic. I want to thank our director, Wendy Chung-Hoon, who's here with us today, and her team at the Women's Bureau who's with us today, and everyone in the department who worked on this report who did some amazing work. It's not just about the impact of a pandemic. It's about how low pay and limited opportunities left women vulnerable and continue to leave women vulnerable, especially women of color in this country. These injustice has been created over many decades. This isn't something new, and we can't blame the pandemic for it, because we could have done the report 3 years ago on something else, and the report's going to say the same things. Women continue to be overrepresented in low-paying, low-quality jobs, especially in the care sector. Many lack access to paid leave, protections to take care of their own families. So at the Department of Labor, we continue to fight with women and for women in the workforce. We are identifying the needs and advocating for solutions for women and other vulnerable workers all across this country, so we create an inclusive economy that works for everyone. I'm not going to go too much into this. We need to invest in child care. We need to invest in elder care. Women are disproportionately working in those industries. We need to build pathways for women into good-paying, high-quality jobs dominated by men, like the building trades, which I come out of. Our Good Job initiative is working across sectors in government here to make sure that all the cabinets and all the secretaries are working collectively together. Congress is going to talk today, and they've done some amazing work. We have a Speaker of the House who is leading the way in this country for equality for women in pay in every other way. It's an honor for me to be standing here with the Congressman. President Biden and Vice President Harris are pushing to remove barriers for caregiving and improving the well-being of many women working in the cares economy. I'm excited to be partnering with all of you here today. I want to thank you all for the work you do. I want to give a shout out to Boston. We have an office of everyone laughs when I do that because I do it every single time I speak. But we have a Women's Bureau in Boston too. Office of Women's Advancement. When I became the mayor of Boston, we had what was called the Women's Commission. And we thought to ourselves, well, it's great to have a women's commission, but we need to do more than that. So we started to look about taking commission turn into an office, and we created the Office of Women's Advancement, because that's what it was all about. I want to thank the work in all across this country. I want to thank all of you standing here. Paid leave for all, I completely agree with you. Thank you for wearing the buttons today. And it's an honor for me. I went too far over because the speaker staff's over here sweating right now, get Marty Walsh away from the microphone. So I'm gonna turn the floor over to the next speaker here, who's also been a champion, Democratic Women's Caucus Chair, Congressman Jackie Speier.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for lifting women up around the country and around the world. To my co-chair, to all the women who are here, thrilled to be with you. They call this Equal Pay Day, but I like to call it Unequal Pay Day because that's the message that we are conveying today. You've heard the statistics. The numbers are just dismal. And women are making 83 cents on the dollar. African-American women are making 58 cents on the dollar. And Latina women are making 49 cents on the dollar. There was a bot that was created last week that I thought was really interesting. It's called the Gender Pay Gap Bot, and it came out of the UK. And what they found was that for all the lip service we give to equal pay, many other companies are falling woefully below the standards. For instance, in the UK, Goldman Sachs is paying women 36% less than men in those positions. Virgin Atlantic, 58 cents, or 58%, I should say, and Ryanair, 68% less than their male counterparts. We did pass the Paycheck Fairness Act with great, robust energy and support. It is now sitting in the Senate where it has been filibustered. So I really think that more than anything, we have an obligation to right this wrong. And the best way to do it is through the Paycheck Fairness Act. An example, Tracy Rexroth out of the Department of Education in Arizona was hired for the job. Her colleague was hired at the same time. She's making $17,000 less a year because they related it to her prior salary. Prior salary should have anything to do with what you're being paid. So as we look at the rebounding in the economy where men have now regained all of the jobs they lost during the pandemic, there's still 1 million women who are not back at work. and we need to fix that. So I guess the message more than anything is stop with the lip service, stop with the lip gloss during, during Women's History Month. Let's get to it and get equality on the books. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Leah Rambo, who is the Director of Training at the Sheet Metal Workers Union 28. She's been at this position, or certainly in the sheet metal workers, for 34 years.
That number 34 already always gets me. I feel like I'm too young for that many years, but here I stand. I guess my story today is really how do we change this gap? And I would say you start very, very young. You know, from a young age, I had my first tool set at the age of 10. And that's when I started my career in the trades. And I came from a household where there were no girl jobs and boy jobs. Everyone did dishes. The only rule was my father wasn't doing them. And so it was a natural progression for me to get into the trades. The building trades is a way to equal those wages. It is an excellent opportunity for women. Of course, there are challenges. It hasn't been smooth sailing for the 34 years, but I'm pretty scrappy and got a lot of grit, so we keep pushing things along. And that's why it's such an honor to be here today with such leaders as yourself, who are really helping us, who's shining that light on our journey. I will say that when you start young with girls, don't limit them, then there's really no telling it what they can do and how they can succeed. But making $50 an hour, $60 an hour, good union wages, of course, doesn't mean anything if you work 0 hours. And so that's the next step. Are women not just getting paid equitably, but are they working those hours? Are they getting those pension credits? And you know, some of the things that we can do is really monitor that. We have laws on the books, we have goals. Enforcement is a key part. We hope that some of that infrastructure money will go towards things like that through enforcement of these goals, through training to help change the culture so that women, once they come into these occupations that are segregated, then they can be successful there. And so, you know, I guess that's my story today, and what my goal is and what I hope that we can continue to press forward and do is get women to equal our pay, equal our hours, so that we're in a position to be able to feed our families. And I'm going to introduce today someone who I admire greatly. Actually, there's really everyone here I admire greatly, but Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, who's out of the 14th District of Michigan, who currently serves on the co-chair on the Democratic Women's Caucus, and is no stranger to occupational segregation. She was the first African-American and first woman to serve as mayor in the city of Southfield in Michigan. So, Congresswoman Lawrence.
I want to say good afternoon to everyone. I'm so proud to stand here with my co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus. I want to thank Nancy Pelosi and Secretary Wash for your leadership, especially as we fight for equal pay. I want everyone to remember this is Women's History Month, and I remind people during Black History Month and during Women's History Month, we celebrate those who came before us. We talk about their prowess and how they made a difference. Well, we are all on the clock now. It's our turn to make history. And I stand here today under the guidance of the Lady of Freedom that sits on top of this building. She has a sword in one hand and a wreath of peace in the other, meaning that we know how to be kind and diplomatic. But when it comes to our rights, sometimes we have to fight for them. And I can tell you that we absolutely must do that. And if I can bring up my shero, Shirley Chisholm, who said if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Today, we're standing here with our folding chair. We are not going to be quiet on this. This is what this country needs to do. And I was told early on in life, if you want to know what someone values, follow the money. And we as women in this country, we know we add value to our economy, to our communities, to the overall safety of this country. And we demand the respect and to be valued by paying us a wage that is equal. And I will not leave this mic without pointing out the challenges of women of color. You heard the statistics that my co-chair Spears spoke of. Women of color are disproportionately even worse when it comes to equal pay. And we must stand up and be loud about it, be consistent about it. We did our work in Congress because we have an amazing Speaker of the House, but we must ensure that it's not a quiet day today. That Paycheck Fairness Act is a necessity, because if you do like my another shero of mine, Aretha Franklin, is to give me a little respect. It's not acceptable for me to see my sisters in the workplace and getting paid less. And that point about less hours, that's another way to disenfranchise us. So I want you to know, I will talk about this every year, but hopefully next year, I keep hope alive. Next year, we'll be saying, we finally got it right, and let's continue our fight. And I will end with a statement that I know my speaker is going to say again, but when women succeed, America succeeds. And now I would like to bring forth Bethany, who is the equal pay advocate, a care worker, and a member leader of the Family Values at Work.
Thank you, and thank you to all the leaders here today. My name is Bethany Foto. I'm from Massachusetts, and I'm representing the Coalition for Social Justice as well as Family Values at Work. As we speak about Equal Pay Day, I ask myself why I've done the jobs that I have. And those jobs include being a college-educated and state-certified early education teacher, as well as a restaurant employee. Because being educated and certified does not pay the bills. Both are minimum wage, no benefit jobs. I also ask why women are penalized for being caregivers as well as providers, especially during COVID. I am a single mother. I had to work because I was an essential worker, but if one of my children were sick, I could not work, and I couldn't go back to work until there were negative tests, and I think it really brought to the forefront what an unfair position we are put in, especially as mothers, that we have to be everything to everyone, and it's impossible. I'm glad to see that you are issuing a report on the economic impact of COVID and occupational segregation of women. For those of us who could not perform our work from home during the pandemic, the difficulties of managing care and work and responsibilities were often brutal. As this country was built often on the back of slaves, right now this country is still being kept alive on the back of women. And I really hope that we can someday really not just give a attaboy and a pat on the back to women, but really give us the respect and the pay that we deserve. Now I would like to introduce a personal hero of mine. She is a 20th director of the Women's Bureau appointed by President Biden on February 1st, 2021, and a leader, a mentor, and aspirational Wendy Chunhoon.
Thank you, friend. I am really honored to be with this distinguished group and to mark the unfortunate occasion of Equal Pay Day with the introduction of our new report, which explains how and why women, and especially women of color, were most impacted during the pandemic, a reality owing to in no small part to the fact that women tend to be concentrated in a subset of female-dominated jobs, otherwise known as occupational segregation. Through the pandemic, but really long before it, women have been overrepresented in occupations and industries that pay low wages. In the pandemic, these same occupations suffered the greatest job losses. I don't want to give too many details away that my colleague Sarah Jane is going to mention as she talks about the report as one of its co-authors, but I would be remiss if I didn't underscore the connection to why we're gathered here today, to mark Equal Pay Day, the symbolic recognition of the persistent gender wage gap. Each year, the Women's Bureau and grassroots organizations all across the country mark Equal Pay Day to recognize the fact that it takes the average woman a full year plus several months into this next year to get paid the same amount that the average man gets paid in the previous year. We raise awareness about the gender wage gap and the problem and its intransigence, and advocate for just and common sense compensation policies and practices so that one day we will succeed in eradicating it. The gender wage gap and the factors that contribute to it, key among them, occupational segregation, cost women workers billions of dollars annually. We are so honored to have both you, Leah, and Bethany with us today to bring two very different experiences, but the same reality, and who are fighting every day for change and for winning, and are winning change themselves. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Women's Bureau Senior Advisor Sarah Jane Glynn to discuss the report's main findings and factors that collided during the pandemic to engulf women in this perfect storm and what we can do about it right now.
Hey, y'all. We know when it comes to the pandemic, the unemployment effects were hardest on women, and a lot of that was driven by the experiences of women of color. And this is largely because of the jobs that women hold, like Wendy mentioned. Women are most likely to work in female-dominated occupations, as nurses, as teachers, working as administrative assistants, in kitchens, in hotels. Women are 95% of all childcare workers and 2% of all electricians. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about occupational segregation. Women are overrepresented in some jobs and they're underrepresented in others. And this mattered during the pandemic because of the sectors where job losses were concentrated. But it matters all the time. And it's a problem not just because of economic shocks and potential vulnerability, but because it stymies personal potential. It limits innovation and it places artificial constraints on economic growth. So our problem isn't that women have some jobs and not others. Our problem is that the jobs women are concentrated in tend to be low-quality jobs. They're more likely to offer low wages, and they're less likely to offer benefits. Like Wendy mentioned, this devaluation of women's labor, and especially the devaluation of the labor of women of color, leads to the gender and racial wage gaps. In our report that's out today, we estimate even before the pandemic increased unemployment for women and women of color, Black women lost $39.3 billion in lower wages only because of occupational and industry segregation. And the losses were even greater for Hispanic women at $46.7 billion. This is a really big problem, and it has a lot of different causes, so that means we need big solutions, and we need to attack the problem from a lot of different directions. But luckily, we have ideas about what we can do. Like Leah mentioned, we need to create pathways for women to enter into non-traditional careers that are more likely to offer higher wages. And like Bethany talked about, we need to raise the floor on wages and benefits for all workers, but especially for those who are working in women-dominated jobs that serve as the backbone for our economy. I think we've seen during the pandemic what happens when the care sector is decimated. We can't let that continue to happen. And we also need to make sure that when we're thinking about the jobs of the future, the jobs that are being created right now, like those through the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law, that we're baking gender and racial equity into them from the foundation up. We can do this, and the Department of Labor is very committed to making sure this happens. Thank you all so much for being here today, and it's my honor to turn it back over to our host, Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Secretary Walsh. My colleagues, Jackie Spear and Brenda Lawrence, our special guest, Bethany Foto, and again, Leah Rambo, telling their stories right from the workplace. And of course, we were greatly informed by what Wendy Shunhun and Sarah Jane Glynn told us about these figures. A writer once said, the sign of a truly intelligent person is that they're swayed by statistics. These statistics are staggering. They're not only staggering, they're heartbreaking. And again, President Kennedy, many years ago, established the first Equal Pay Day. And President Obama signed the bill, and he signed that bill, and President Obama signed the bill, the Lilly Ledbetter bill. This president, President Biden, is doing so many things, as have been referenced in the infrastructure bill and the rest, to have opportunity for women, whether it's workforce development, whether it's apprenticeships and the rest, but also in other legislation that will say that we have universal pre-K, that we have lower costs for child care, lower costs for health care, home health care, and respecting the work that women do as health care providers. There's a decision. I mean, we are talking about survival for some people. We want them to have success as we go forward, but to do that, we have to be transformational in how we recognize the challenge that we face and pass legislation and establish public policy to make the difference for women. In this Women's History Month, last week, we celebrated Title IX, 50-year anniversary coming up in another month or two, honoring Patsy Mink, who established that. You mentioned Shirley Chisholm, who had so many great things to say about this. And now we have our role to play in all of this. And again, maybe next year, as Congresswoman Lawrence said, maybe next year we will have passed a bill for equal pay for equal work, and this will be a sad remnant of the past. But thank you, Secretary Walsh, for your leadership in this, in every aspect of your personal and professional life, your official role now then as mayor and now as Secretary of Labor. I know that women's issues will be well served by the great team that you have there to face the fact of what these statistics are and what they mean at the kitchen table of America's working families. And understand, I mean, men have responsibilities at home too. We want them to benefit from childcare and the rest. But lowering the cost of childcare is one of the most important things that we can do to make sure that women can take their comfortable, rightful place in the workforce without worrying about the safety and security of their children. All of these things are connected. We're very, very proud to have, as I say, our special guests, Leah Rambo and Bethany Foto. Thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. And I like your shirt. I like your shirt. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Mr. Secretary.